Such a cute little hunter. You eat that catnip mouse. Yeah. Creator made this cat mouse, for reference. Catnip mouse. Good getting internet. Today's video is not going to be much of a vlog, per se, so much as an instruction thing. So if you're looking for vlogging-like content, feel free to skip the video. But, well, it's important to me, so I'm going to talk about it. Now, I know that I'm one of those people that tend to be focused on technology and computing. It's almost as though I have been working in that industry for my entire professional career, which extends beyond my adult life. But there are just certain things that bother me. And one of the big things that bother me in particular is what's referred to as the enshittification of the internet. Long story short, it is how a lot of companies, you will notice this in all over the place right now, but probably most commonly you'll see this in Netflix and Spotify and all of those services, or Uber or Airbnb or any of those things where the service itself was probably fine originally, although it wasn't making any money whatsoever, and in order to tweak it to try to increase profits as much as they can for the next quarter, they start making it worse and worse of a product to squeeze that last little penny, that last little kroner out of whatever product it is. And it sucks, because there's nothing you can do about it, because there's no competition anymore, because all of the competition got killed off from, like, you know, a good example, in Madison, Uber and Lyft basically killed most of the taxi companies in the city. All that was left by the time that I moved out of Madison were 2 taxi companies, whereas when I moved in it was more like 20. And those 2 taxi companies had hardly anybody willing to work for them because hardly anybody was using them, even though companies like Uber and Lyft were now more expensive than the taxi companies. They basically just killed off all of their competition while prices were low, and then raised their rates. This is a very common business plan. In addition, you have companies like, for instance, Netflix, which is raising rates and removing content for little to no reason. Or even worse, Discovery Plus, where they're actively making movies and then turning around and just not releasing them and deleting them in order to gain some weird tax benefits that come straight out of the old Mel Brooks film, The Producers. I think it was originally a stage play. Whatever, anyway. So one of the things that I've been trying to do over the past few years is to have some semblance of control when it comes to the services that I use. Now, I'm not saying that I don't pay for online streaming services. I, in fact, pay for Dropout and Nebula, for an example. I currently pay for YouTube Premium, for that matter, although that will probably be stopping somewhat soon. Partially due to one of the things that I'm going to be showing you in these series of videos. I expect this to be like 2+ videos, but who knows? I am going to stop paying for Spotify because I personally find their method of business incredibly distasteful, to put it mildly. They are not paying artists that aren't in the top 2% of artists or something like that are actually being paid at all. And even then, they're not being paid all that much. Whereas most of the work that I'm listening to, yeah, they're probably not in the top 2% of artists. On top of that, instead of paying artists, they're funneling all of their money toward people like Joe Rogan. Which, no, what the hell are you doing? Anyway, all this is for me to say, one of the things that I have been trying to do is avoiding situations like that. That is the actual notice that I had received. I had already done a lot of this work in advance, I've just been lazy about it, saying that my Gmail is at 91% full. Now, this is a bit of a misnomer because it's not actually Gmail that's full. Google aggregates all of their storage into one Google Drive, regardless of whether that's coming from Gmail or other services. In this case, Google Photos is the reason why. And the reason why my Google Photos is full is because Pixel phones and other Android phones default to backing up to Google Photos. It's actually not obvious how you'd be able to back up to anywhere else, and I am a big advocate of backups. So of course I enabled it, and it filled up. And at one point, I was paying Google money per month to store photos on an off-site location when I already have on-site backups and on-site photos, or on-site storage for photos and so on. I was just not doing it because it took me effort. And eventually all of these things combined where I just went, it's enough. I'm stopping this. I am taking the work and time and effort in order to make my own home server and self-hosted environment, which is what I'm going to be talking about. This video is going to be mostly about the hardware side of things. I'll do a different video about the software side of things because there's a lot to cover. So, first off, what is this crap? By self-hosting, what I'm referring to is that you host the services that would normally be hosted by your Googles, your Microsofts, your Amazons, even your Netflix, your Spotify, and so on. You're hosting those services yourself instead of paying somebody else to host them for you. Sometimes you'll be paying somebody to handle some aspects of it, but not all of it. But in general, I'm just going to talk about the ones where you're just covering everything. And the way you do this is by hosting it on computers that you have, either ones that you already have in the house or ones that you buy specifically for this purpose. This is where the term home server comes from, because you're hosting a server at home. I know, it's just completely mind-blowing where these terms come from. So what do I mean by home server? Does that mean that I have a giant rack mount server sitting in my house? No, actually, I don't. I have very little in the way of enterprise hardware in my house right now. What I try to encourage people to look at is any computer that they happen to have spare, just sitting around not doing anything. That's a computer that's sitting around spare. It was my mother's old desktop, not the last computer that she used, but the one before. She used it for several years. It's not very good. It is, in fact, a piece of garbage and might as well be considered e-waste. I did not mean to have it packed. It was just in the stuff that ended up being packed. So, it's here. So, what I could do is use this little shoebox server, shoebox machine, shoebox computer, whatever you want to call it, and use this as the basis of my home server. I could absolutely do this, and I highly recommend that people start with things that they already have at home, even if this is a piece of garbage. Like, just opening it up to show how big of a piece of garbage this is. There is not a CPU fan in here. That's because this thing is so bad, so old, that I'm pretty sure I can use an old cell phone to be a more powerful server than this thing. So, when I am talking about home servers, I am even talking about pieces of crap like this. Chances are, a lot of people who, let's say, for instance, you've upgraded laptops, or you've upgraded your gaming desktop, or a lot of other things. You might have a spare computer that's just sitting around collecting dust, or needs to go to the recycling facility. As long as it works, use what you have free first. Even if it doesn't work very well, at least it gives you an idea as to what you might want to buy. Plus, free is a good price. Otherwise, my recommendation is to go with something power efficient. This is a Raspberry Pi 3. Let me just take it out of its little case here. This thing. I've had this for a while. I bought this, when this was the new current model at least, and we're up to a Raspberry Pi 5 now. I bought this specifically to match one that I bought for Creator that was stuffed to the brim full of Amiga games. Strangely enough, now it's being used as a home server for Creator, but that's neither here nor there. This would work for pretty close to everything that I would be talking about. But this is also not what I would recommend purchasing at this point. Sure, it costs like $50 US or so. But it's not necessarily a good deal for the price. There's only so much you can do with these things. They tend to fry components. There's not a whole bunch of expansion capacity outside of USB ports. And it's just kind of, if you already know that your needs will fit on this, it's fine. If you don't know what your needs are because you're just jumping into this now, this is probably not okay. This is actually one of my mini PCs. This is Rudius. I just realized I'm going to have to mirror image this entire video now. This is one of my 2 mini PCs. The other one's right here. And these are a way better deal, even though they cost a little bit more. This is actually a former banking desktop. One moment, I need to stop my cats from killing each other. Anyway, this I purchased off of eBay a few years back from a off-lease seller. So what ends up happening is that large corporations, rather than buying hardware, lease it for tax reasons. It's entirely because of tax reasons. It has nothing to do with anything else. It's because it's tax advantageous to consider this a operating expense instead of a capital expense, which they can do if they lease the hardware. But leases usually last 3 or 4 years. After the 3 or 4 years are up, you would return the hardware to the company that you leased it from, who now has a bunch of old hardware that nobody really wants. So they will frequently either send it to a recycler, send it to donate it, or eBay it. This came from a bank. Both of mine actually came from the same banking corporation. They were completely wiped, so they had no financial records on it or anything like that. Securely and completely wiped, I should say. And at the time I bought this, these 2 were on eBay for $250 US each. I had made them an offer of $400 US for both. They accepted, and at this point, you would be able to find this closer to $100 US in the US and 150 euro in mainland Europe, and equivalent transfers of money, which, side note, it's not just a pure currency conversion. Used hardware costs about 50% more in Europe than it does in North America. No idea why. And Canadian used hardware costs about 5 to 10% more than US used hardware. Whatever. Anyway, point is, this machine right here, this is a Zen 1 based AMD computer. This is a desktop in this tiny form factor. It came with 16 gig of RAM and a 256 gig SSD, which is more than enough space for everything that we would be needing this for. This particular one has actually been upgraded at this point. This has 64 gig of RAM and, was it total of 6 terabytes of solid-state storage? Or 8? One of the two. Anyway, point is, you don't need to upgrade it. I just went overboard on it. And had some spare hardware lying around. Point is, that, like, if I were to buy that same thing today, it would cost me $100 US. This costs $50 US. This is a lot more than twice as powerful than this. Now, it will use more power. This will typically use about 3 to 5 watts of power at idle. This will use 5 to 10. This particular one is more like 10, but similar hardware is usually 5 to 10 watts of power. And that brings us to the next thing of, why do we care about power use? So, when it comes to home servers, most people, when they're hosting things for their own house, aren't using it constantly. And for all of the examples that I will end up giving, like, even my own home servers are not in use constantly. They are always doing something, but they're not doing much. So what you tend to look at is how much idle power it draws. And the reason for that is that electricity costs money. What we want to do as home server folk is to try to minimize our costs. Well, to be honest, a lot of us try to just they're in the hobby, they're hobbyists, they're going to buy nifty hardware because it looks cool. But in general, if we want to try to do this in a financially viable method, you want to optimize costs. That's the reason why I had first said, use hardware you already have first. Even if that hardware is not suitable for your end purpose, like you have too many services or it costs too much to run because it's taking up too much power, whatever, doesn't matter. The point is, it'll let you figure out what you actually need later, and maybe you end up picking up one of these. Or maybe you end up picking up a larger machine that can actually fit a physical hard drive in it. You'll notice that this is not particularly big. In fact, hold on. There we go. This is a hard drive. This is a 3.5-inch hard drive. It's just one that I have lying around not doing anything. It's an old one. It's only 1.5 terabytes. Yeah. Not gonna fit inside of there. Yeah, it's almost as thick as the actual desktop itself. So yeah, no, you're not going to fit a large hard drive inside of this. These types of mini PCs, they're usually referred to, they've started being referred to as tiny mini micro machines, based off of, let's see if I get this right, Lenovo Tiny, HP Mini, and Dell Micro. This is a Lenovo Tiny, or Lenovo Mini. Damn it, I'm doing it again. This is a Lenovo EliteDesk 705 G4 Mini. In general, if you're going to buy hardware, make sure you get something that on the Intel side of the fence is 7th generation Intel or newer, preferably 8th generation. And on the AMD side of the fence, go with a Zen 1 or newer. Although depending on what you want to host, you probably want to go with Intel. What I have is AMD. I actually don't have any Intel boxes for that. Weirdly, I actually have very few Intel boxes in use at all right now, but that's a coincidence. There is a third option, which is to use an existing gaming machine. The only reason why I don't necessarily recommend that is, one, if you're trying to be optimal when it comes to power, you're probably shutting down your gaming machine when it's not in use, and some of these services you might not want to shut down, which leads to, two, money on power use. A gaming desktop is going to use a lot more power at idle than one of these. And this isn't even the cheapest. Wow, I just noticed how much this wiggles when I pick this up. This machine is not, in fact, the lowest power usage machine that you can get for the same price. It's just the one that I bought. My gaming desktop, for an example, idles at closer to 100 watts of power. This idles at 8. When it comes to power usage, keep in mind, there used to be an old rule of thumb in the US, which was $1 for every watt of usage. $1 per year, I should say, of every watt of usage. That is no longer the case. $1 is as though price per kilowatt hour was about 10 to 11 cents, which is not the case for a majority of the United States anymore. Especially if you are a poor sap that lives in California, or if you live outside of the US, if you live in mainland Europe and not Scandinavia, electricity is a lot more expensive. So that's one of the reasons why I harp on electricity costs. It doesn't take long before you buying a cheap $100 PC makes a lot more sense than you running your gaming desktop. At the same time, using your gaming desktop for something like this, it's a computer that you already have. You don't have to spend extra money. The one thing I will let you know is that you're probably not going to want to run Windows, which complicates things. So anyway, hardware. In general, you want to size your hardware for your needs, and given that I am targeting this at a new home server user, you don't need particularly powerful hardware. Again, this is Zen 1, so this is the equivalent of 7 years old? Yeah, I think this is about 7 years old. So, hence why it's so cheap right now, because most people don't want a 7-year-old desktop. What are you talking about? Whereas, that's actually fine. You don't need more than that. And in fact, the first project that I'm going to do, you can easily do it with one of these. Or even this. Mind you, this is probably more powerful than this. This thing is a piece of garbage. So, I'm not going to talk about the details on software stuff yet, but what's the overall goal with this type of thing? Well, in my mind, the goal is to stop your experience from deteriorating because other companies have decided to enshittify their product. So what I mean are things like stopping intrusive advertising by the use of things like a pie hole, hosting your own music, hosting your own grocery lists, hosting your own photo software so you can stop uploading to Google Cloud and paying them for things. Even extending to no longer paying for Netflix by just buying DVDs and Blu-rays and ripping it yourself instead of relying on a streaming media service where they can just take down the content that you care about and you have no recourse. The whole streaming thing really got into my craw when it came to moving to Norway, because even if I had access to some of the popular streaming services, by changing countries, you lose access to certain content because of the branding and licensing deals that each of the streaming services have. For an example, a TV series that I tend to watch on a regular basis is from the UK called Taskmaster, which, by the way, it's an excellent series. People should watch it. It's hilarious. It's a comedy panel show. Anyway, in the US, I could watch Taskmaster from YouTube. Like, the official Taskmaster YouTube channel releases their content in the US that way. In Norway, I can't, because Norway, the television station that publishes the Norwegian version of Taskmaster, which I'm blanking on the name now, Kongerbefaler, has the rights for distributing Taskmaster in Norway, both their version and everybody else's version. So as a result, I don't have access to the UK Taskmaster anymore, legally. Now, what I could do is use a VPN service, connect to the UK or the US, and then watch it that way, which I have done. Or I can maybe not entirely legitimately acquire the media and host it on my own home streaming service that I use inside of my own house and nowhere else. I don't actually do that for reference. I have other ways of watching things like that. But what I want to do is start showing people that are watching this video some of the possibilities that you can do for little to no money. Because the world sucks. Why are you letting it suck for you more? Unless you don't have the energy for it. I understand that completely. It's taken me 2 days to record this video. Even though it's only been like a 30-minute video, I am utterly exhausted, and this is day 2, even though I'm wearing a brown shirt on both days. This is actually a different shirt than I wore yesterday. Yeah, so... Oh, right, one other thing I should mention. This is my old laptop. This would actually make a very good machine for streaming video, because this uses an Intel processor, and Intel's integrated graphics is actually really good for transcoding video, which is important for your own streaming service. So this laptop would actually work better than even my main desktop for that purpose, just because it's much more energy efficient. So your home server may end up being a laptop. Your home server may end up being an old crappy machine. It may end up being a Raspberry Pi. It could be all sorts of different things. The important part is that it works for you. And this kind of tutorial, kind of introduction, I'm going to start off really simple. I'm going to walk through a Pi-hole installation, and I'll probably end up walking through a couple of other minor things. Maybe not on the same video, maybe not even this month, but yeah. That's my current plan, at least. I have no idea if anybody cares about this content whatsoever. I usually hang around on various subreddits on Reddit, which is another service that's being enshittified, unfortunately. Trying to walk people through basic, simple self-hosting stuff. So if you randomly post questions there, there's a good chance I'm the one that's responding. Hopefully this was at least somewhat entertaining, Internet, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye. I have a cat in crazy cat hour mode right now, and he is looking at his brother like he's going to play. One moment. So he's going on my shoulder now. Ow. That went poorly. Ow. Got clawed right in the chest right there. Not his fault. That was me grabbing the hard drive and everything sliding down because these are not organized very well. Anyway,